The main policy achievements for the EU in the foreign policy realm in 2017, at least at the high political level, would be, to my mind, maintaining unity between the EU member states on sanctions against Russia. Russia has been, through various means, infiltrating in the domestic politics of EU member states in order to disrupt national elections or the media, to send out its own story, in essence. And despite all of this pressure, the EU member states have maintained unity on rolling over the sanctions which it had adopted on Russia's aggressive action in Donbass and Crimea. Then I think the launch of PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation in the area of security and mainly defense, by 25 of the 28 member states, pushes the envelope on security and defense cooperation in the European Union substantially further, where this policy domain had been developing very slowly over the years past. And so 2018 should see a concretization in the capability development of the EU's military arm. And then perhaps at a more specific, more granular level, I think it is important to also pinpoint the Armenia agreement, which EU negotiated as a sort of third way agreement to allow countries in the Eastern Partnership to move closer in its trade negotiations and cooperation with the European Union, whilst at the same time being a member of the Customs Union of the Eurasian Economic Union, which is dominated by Russia. As we know, Armenia and then later Ukraine had to pull out of association agreements under pressure of Moscow and have since been in limbo as to rearranging their ties with both sides.
Well, I think the top concern for the European citizen was migration. After the shock of 2015 and 2016, that was quite understandable. And migration was the top priority of EU foreign policy. The EU tried to engage with the countries of origin and the countries of transit to work on the dismantling of smuggling networks, to negotiate agreements on readmission and returns. Some progress was achieved in this work. The Turkey-EU deal held together despite a very turbulent relationship between the EU and Turkey. And even from Libya, the flows came down towards the end of last year, mainly due to the lead of Italian diplomacy. So some progress was achieved, but a lot remains to be done until the EU really has a sustainable external management of migration.
Well, the crisis and conflicts on the borders of the European Union maintain, a high importance on the diplomatic agenda of the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union. How to tackle the war in Syria, how to prevent it from having a knock-on effect in neighboring countries. In Lebanon, there will be elections this year. And of course, there's the spillover of refugees and in their wake, migrants. There's the issue of Libya, which is still very prevalent on the EU agenda, where the EU is implicated, it seems, through individual member states in some very worrying developments. So tackling with these issues will remain a top priority for EU foreign policy in 2018. In the wake of that, some achievements may be made in relations between the EU and the Western Balkans. Perhaps there will be a solution on the name recognition issue for the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Perhaps there will be a recalibration of the relations with Turkey. But I think the main foreign policy challenge for the European Union in 2018 will ironically be that of maintaining unity in its relations with the strategic partner across the Atlantic. A Trump-led White House, which is increasingly driving an America First policy, which effectively translates in an America Alone policy. We've seen that over the recognition unilaterally of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which undermines the Middle East peace process in which the EU is heavily invested. and the same with the threat of Mr. Trump to withdraw the US from the nuclear agreement with Iran, which has been negotiated under the auspices of the EU with the contribution of 3 EU member states. Maintaining unity in support of global governance institutions like the UN Security Council, which signed off on many resolutions on Israel and Palestine, as well as on the Iran nuclear deal, and international law and support for international law in general will be key to maintaining the EU's position more strategically independently of the United States.
Well, with foreign policy, you never know what happens tomorrow. There are many experts that are very worried about the nuclear issue in North Korea. If this blows up, it will have huge implications also for the EU. But I think more generally, the top priority of the EU in this year will be to do what it can to preserve all elements of the multilateral liberal order, the kind of rules-based order that was built up over decades with the US in the lead and with the European states strongly supportive, is now under challenge with the new American administration pulling out of the climate deal, dismantling some multilateral trade arrangements. We don't know what Mr. Trump will do next, but for the EU, they have no alternative but to work towards a rule-based order. Otherwise, the EU cannot exist anymore. And building alliances with other stakeholders such as Japan, Canada, on some issues even China and Russia is essential to preserve this approach to settling international issues, and also to engage very strongly and systematically with the US in order to limit the damage and try to get the positive re-engagements of the US as soon as that is possible.